Hi, my name's Derek. I'm co-founder and CEO at Corl. I'm a mathematician that used to lead the quant team at KPMG in Toronto, and I've advised over 3 dozen financial institutions on risk management. Today, more than 30% of new businesses are online, tech, or digital, and this represents a multi-trillion-dollar funding opportunity that grows at over $40 billion per year. I'd like you to think about a small business within the digital economy, such as an e-commerce or a SaaS company. Firstly, chances are they have no assets, and debt's only available to businesses that have assets to lend against. Secondly, unless they plan to Bezos or Zuckerberg their way to 100x growth, it's unlikely that equity is available or it's expensive, and entrepreneurs have to give up control. Corl is addressing this funding gap by providing businesses with growth capital and sharing in their revenue. It takes about 10 minutes for a business to apply. We connect to accounting, banking, marketing, payment processor, and additional information that we source online to automate a financing decision. Businesses that have a minimum rating of over BBB are considered for financing from Corl, whereas the rest are referred to our capital partners. So where are we? Well, Corl launched Luna, which is our financing software, last year. We've had over 850 businesses apply for financing with us. Over 25 have been financed by us or our capital partners, and we're looking to 5x that by next year. We are currently in a $750,000 equity round on a pre-money valuation of $3.8 million, and we have $450,000 committed to date. We also have a number of debt providers lined up to accelerate the growth of our portfolio upon completion of our equity round. So if you're interested in the future of business financing, please come speak to me.
Good job. I like the fact that, as I talked before, I always love the fact when the founder gives me a little bit of an insight as to who they are, why they're pursuing this particular passion. I would say, I am interested to understand that aspect, so I get the sort of technical competency that you bring to the table, but I'm always curious. Like, I'll just even start. Why are you pursuing this? What is it that's driving you to this?
I guess it's always been somewhat of my life's mantra to automate myself out of the equation. So I'm driven by efficiency and effectiveness, and so if I can find a way to make a process a little bit less human-centric, that's always been my goal. It's focused on optimization, and this market in particular, the early-stage funding market, is still fairly arcane in terms of the way that processes work. I mean, I'm sure certain venture capital firms have a more efficient process than others. However, there's a lack of data, I think, that's being used. Even on the commercial side, you look at financial institutions opening up their portfolios, you can see that, first of all, there's not really a product that's offered to these types of asset-light small businesses. And moreover, the process is quite slow. And if you're in a competitive marketplace for financing, you want to be able to get to a decision as quickly as possible in order to get that customer.
So one thing that I would like to probably focus on within the pitch is kind of talking about the funding gap a little bit more and the options that are out there, right? So I think when I hear what you're working on, one of the things that comes to my mind is there's a difference between, not every startup is venture fundable, right? For a multitude of reasons. It could be that there aren't economies of scale. It could be that the founder honestly wants a lifestyle business, which is not really conducive to venture capital. And so I'd love to talk a little bit, center a little bit more on the use case of, here's the number of businesses that kind of fit this profile. This is how many of them die off because they don't get capital, or some sort of, speak to me about the problem of the inability to attract capital, or maybe even the other side of this idea that people start up business, X number of businesses every year, only so many of them receive this type of funding, and yet they need growth capital. So I think being able to really quantify the market a little bit better and who you're targeting with the product would help me a little bit more. I also didn't get a sense for who your customer is, meaning what size business are they? What's the profile? What size of it sounded like, and I get the product because I've heard other people kind of talk about these type of revenue share products, but do you have a sense of what size of, what's your sweet spot in terms of how much you're quote unquote loaning the company? I guess I didn't quite understand the particulars of the product or the customer side.
Yeah. Yeah, so in terms of frequency of, we'll call it sub-segment or industry, it's e-commerce, it's SaaS, they're digital service implementation companies, companies that exist online. In terms of their revenue profile, anywhere from 10 million in monthly up to about 200,000 in monthly revenue. So on an annualized basis, roughly 2 million, we'll call it. That seems to be the sweet spot. So about 80% of our target customer falls within that range.
And the last one, and then you can jump.
Take your time.
When I think about how you're going to acquire customers, I think that's one of the questions that I have. So it strikes me as I'd go online, I'd say small business funding or something, and the AdWords push me to what you have, and I take a look at it, I can apply and see if I get approved. One question that I have is, would you work with someone like Idea Fund? So we may have a company that's growing in our portfolio, and we may desire to not add more dilutive capital, right? Because that hurts us as well. Is it something where you see partnering with other capital sources like venture capital in order to distribute, or how do you think about customer acquisition?
Yeah, we've got, from a customer acquisition side, we have what are called referral partners. And so we've got 20 plus incubators, accelerators, venture capital firms, even small business lenders where it doesn't really fit a debt profile for them, they'll refer business to us. And then it's a bilateral arrangement as well, where we'll refer a deal flow that doesn't fit a revenue sharing model, but might be a good equity deal.
So when it's very easy to sit here and tell you all the things you didn't say when you had your 2 minutes, right? So what we're trying to provide feedback is not about giving you a whole list of things that you could have said, because there's a lot. Most of the stuff you could have said about your business, you didn't say, obviously, because you were only speaking for 2 minutes. But that's not the point, and hopefully the audience doesn't get that that's what we're trying to do. What I think about is, what are the things that you should have said in that 2 minutes? What are the things that are important? And that's different for every business. So I try to think what I would have liked to have heard from your business. In a way, I think it's just, again, thinking about the audience as being the investor, and you're going to have to try to answer in 2 minutes the things that are going to sort of make that investor want to have a cup of coffee with you afterwards. And for me, just like with Chris, is about the human aspect of the investor, right? I mean, every investor is different. We work together, but for me, typically there's a couple of things that I need to hear from every entrepreneur in order to understand whether it fits what I do, what I'm looking for. And you're gonna have to understand also, whoever you're talking to, what are the kinds of things. So it's important to think about this, right? Like, Chris likes the human story. I like to get a sense for the size of the opportunity, to see if it's something that would fit what I do, what I'm interested in. And then the other thing is your differentiation. It's the thing that makes you different. It's kind of similar to what Chris is trying to get at, I think, with the human story. But typically, you are going after a new market, or you're trying to disrupt the market. I didn't quite understand how you're going to disrupt this existing market. I didn't quite get the amazing thing, the punch that you're going to say, why is everybody else dumb? Why aren't they doing this? So to capture the essence as to why is the market is the way it is, and how is it that you're so much clever coming in and doing something different? And if you can capture that, I'm sure that there is something there. Most entrepreneurs do have something about their market, and either the market is too small, and then in that case, you might have something very clever, but the problem is, as an investor, I'm not interested because your moat is a little too small, or you do have something really big, and in which case, I really want to work with you on that. So I would love to understand that a little bit better. What makes you want to do things that banks would not want to, or no other investor would typically want to do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Please. Yeah, that's a question for you now.
Yeah. So number one, we collect more data on an individual business than anyone else in the early stage space that we're aware of. That's including transaction level information, every single transaction they made in their bank account over the last 4 months, including every single transaction in their accounting software since inception on the business. That's a huge advantage for us, not only from the origination or adjudication standpoint, but also monitoring, because that's refreshed on a monthly basis. It allows us to de-risk ourselves and action on the credit risk or investment risk over time. Number two is we've automated a large part of the qualitative due diligence, the churns, the retentions, the analysis behind the financial statements from kind of a more a financial-oriented standpoint. That's generated in an automated due diligence report that's created on a nightly basis for each business that applies for financing with us. The methodology itself is a little bit different. I don't want to talk too much about that right now, but the idea is that we factor in return and risk in the way that we do the adjudication, whereas most financial institutions that are in the asset-light small business space focus primarily on risk only. They don't look at profitability, which largely we factor in a capital allocation optimization within that. We do risk-based pricing as well. So in many cases, it's kind of a buy box for small businesses where if you're over a certain credit rating, then it kind of gets passed on to diligence or adjudication, whereas we focus on optimization of the pricing based on our own internal IRR targets. So that gives us a return advantage. In addition to that, it's our methodology. So we've developed a couple machine learning packages in-house based off of some work in my old consulting company that I've rolled in as assets. So that in itself, the data, the methodology, the automation, the customer experience that we've condensed down to 10 minutes gives us an advantage unfairly to the competitor.
Can you describe a little bit who you see as your main competition? Who is it that you're competing with?
Yeah, so there's a company called Clearbank that they've been in the news recently. They raised $300 million, I think Q1 or Q2 of this past year. About a year ago, they changed their branding to match ours. So they adopted the revenue sharing vertical. And so whenever you type in revenue sharing into Google, you'll see us and you'll see Clearbank. They're spending a ton on marketing ads, millions a year in advertising, which is good because any article that's written on revenue sharing also references us. So right now, depending on what article you read, we're either listed as the number 2 or number 3 brand in revenue sharing. So that's actually been a big help for us. And the fact that there's reasons I can get into why we're better competitively oriented than them in the market. However, I'd see them or other revenue-based financiers as the competition. They're the one that's quickest catching up to our technology. We focus on building out the software for 3 years before they started to enter this. And so for us, we have that kind of first mover advantage. However, I can't ignore that they are moving and spending a lot of money in this space to build that out.
One thing that just caught my attention is this idea of the automated due diligence and kind of the robustness of it. So one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is the sort of how do we, as venture capitalists, how do we really reimagine the capital stack? So my original job was in M&A, right? And so when you do an M&A deal, you have all these tranches of capital that come in, right, that finance the deal, particularly if you're doing like a leverage buyout. So, but that doesn't apply in the early stage, right? It's pretty much we just give equity and then we wait until they get bigger and bigger before we start thinking about it. So I do think there's a really interesting opportunity to partner with equity partners on twofold. One is maybe it enhances our financial due diligence ability to take a look at, especially if it takes 10 minutes. That'd be pretty interesting for us.
It's a lot less than what we spend.
Yeah, for sure. And then the final is really working with folks to really figure out if there's an optimal capital stack even in the earlier days, because it's generally not something that we contemplate.
Yeah, well, from a business, I mean, M&A side, you're trying to lower your weighted average cost of capital in some way and still have enough liquidity for business operations and growth capital and minimizing your insolvency risk, essentially. And so that's kind of where we pair well with equity investors. In terms of where we fit in the capital stack, we are more senior, obviously, than an equity. We take a GSA against the company. However, the IRRs are about 20 to 50% on an annualized basis. Yet we're kind of having the risk profile that's more like a hybrid mezzanine type debt. So it's quite interesting from a venture capital standpoint if they're willing to open up their financial instrument base, and think a little bit outside of equity.
And my last piece of feedback would be to say that the more technical your pitch, the more technical your story, your technology, the more you need to throw in the human aspect of it, whether it's your own story or the story of a customer, so that people can relate to it. It just makes things much easier to understand, technically speaking, and I think it allows you to talk about the technology within the context of the story. I think your business itself is very technical, so There's a fine balance, right? Because you only have 2 minutes, so it's tough. But usually that helps.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, both of you.